The Eagles just finally made the move that we've all been waiting for, as after all the rumors this entire offseason, the Birds have officially traded edge rusher Bryce Huff to the San Francisco 49ers in a move that I think makes a ton of sense for both sides. And for the Eagles, this move is even better than you might think, because Howie Roseman managed to pull off something behind the scenes that's pretty amazing. So in this video, I'm going to break down this trade, why it happened, and what it means for both sides, so let's get started right now. So Bryce Huff was easily one of the Eagles' biggest and most exciting free agent additions during the 2024 offseason, but I feel like people kind of tend to forget that the whole reason the Eagles even signed Huff in the first place was because of what was going on with some of their other edge rushers on the team at the time. I mean, for starters, you had Hassan Reddick, who, sure, he was coming off 2 back-to-back awesome seasons with the Eagles, but the thing was, he was 29 years old, he was set to go into the last year of his contract, and he was demanding a new contract extension. He wanted to be paid like one of the top edge rushers in the entire NFL, but the Eagles, seeing that he was getting up there in age, just simply didn't want to pay him that. So there was this whole offseason trade saga going on with him. I believe at some point the Birds granted him permission to seek a trade, and there was just, going into free agency, I believe he was still on the team, but there was a lot of uncertainty surrounding him, and a couple weeks later, he ended up getting traded to the New York Jets. And obviously, we know what happened with him since then. He's kind of been a headache for, both the Jets and now the Buccaneers not showing up at OTAs, but, it is what it is. Anyways, that was one of the huge reasons that the Eagles even signed Bryce Huff in the first place. And then also on top of that, you had what was going on with Josh Sweat at the time, being that he was going into the last year of his contract. The Eagles wanted to rework his deal, I believe, just for financial reasons and to, open up some cap space. And at one point, I believe Josh Sweat even said goodbye to Eagles fans on social media. So it definitely looked like he wasn't going to be on the roster that year. Now, obviously, they were able to work something out, do a 1-year restructure, and have him return for the 2024 season. And thank goodness they did that, because obviously he was a huge reason they were able to win the Super Bowl. But yeah, basically, again, the reason I bring this up is because there was a lot of uncertainty for the Eagles at the edge rusher position at the time, hence why they went and signed Bryce Huff. And, this was a move that I thought at the time made a lot of sense. Obviously, you didn't know what was going to happen with Reddick or Sweat, so why not go get a guy like Bryce Huff, who the past couple seasons, maybe he didn't have a super big role with the New York Jets, but he showed a lot of promise at the edge rusher position, especially as a pass rusher. As in 2022, he was first in pass rush win rate, and he was third in that same category in 2023. Plus, he was just coming off a career-best season where he put up 10 sacks with the New York Jets defense. So, again, he was seen as this up-and-coming young edge rusher who was going to be a star very, very soon. So, it made a lot of sense for the Eagles to sign him, and that they did, as they brought him in on a 3-year, $51 million deal in March of 2024. And obviously, the Eagles' overall hope for him was that he would develop even more, become an every-down player, and just become a star at the edge rusher position for them. However, we obviously know that that's not what happened with Bryce Huff in the 2024 season. I mean, to start off the year, there was a lot of high hopes, but in training camp, you could hear little doubts, little inklings that Huff wasn't quite ready to be an every down player at the NFL level. And you could see that, through the first 4 games of the season. Huff pretty much did absolutely nothing in those first 4 games. He was slipping and sliding all over the field. And it didn't look great. He literally did not contribute in any single area. Obviously, extremely disappointing start. Then after the bye week, I think you kind of started to see Huff come along a little bit. I think they started using him in a little bit of a different way than they were earlier in the season, and that paid off slightly. I think he had a couple decent games, namely the one against the Cowboys, where I think his PFF grade was the highest on the Eagles' entire team. But unfortunately for Huff, that's also when he started to develop some sort of wrist injury. They decide that he's going to get surgery and he's going to miss a lot of time. So any sort of progress he was starting to make got derailed by that injury. Then eventually he comes back later in the season and ready to get ramped up for the playoffs. But after he comes back, he didn't do anything either. And then you get to the Super Bowl and he's listed as an inactive. He's not injured. They just simply listed him as inactive for the game. So, overall, year 1 of the Bryce Huff experience in Philadelphia was obviously a huge failure. And overall, I think the reason that it didn't work out was just because Huff, while having a lot of talent and showing a lot of promise in previous years with the Jets, he just didn't really fit the Eagles' scheme and system with Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator. I think they were trying to get him to do things that he wasn't necessarily super comfortable doing. And I think overall, The reason why Bryce Huff didn't work out with the Eagles is explained perfectly here in this video released by Elliott Shore-Parks in an interview where he was talking to Bryce Huff earlier this season.
The talk recently about the difference between lining up with like standing up versus having, both hands in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
When you have both hands in the ground, you're really explosive off the ball.
Yeah.
I was curious for you, just what is the difference in lining up? What are the advantages of one versus the other?
I think it's just comfortability, like knowing my body. I've rushed that way for as long as I can remember. So it's like I just got that muscle memory, and my angles are different, like my shin angles and my leverage coming off the ball versus like when you don't know the snap count. From a 2-point stance, you kind of have to lean into it versus in a 4-point stance, you always have that tension on your hands. So like when you lift your hands off the ground, you're moving forward. So it saves time on the rush. I'm used to the timing and all that stuff, so there's a lot that goes into it.
So you did it more in New York, it seems like.
Oh, every
snap, right?
100% of my sacks came off of me being in a 4-point stance.
Yeah, so again, I think it's really unfortunate the way things played out. I mean, the fact of the matter is, Huff is a guy that does have a lot of talent. He does have a lot of ability in his body, but the problem is that he just never really fit what the Eagles were trying to do on defense, hence the reason why it didn't work out. So now you get to this offseason, and the Eagles' main priority has really just been trying to clear cap space so that they have the ability to sign all their young stars to future contracts, to sign them to big extensions. You got a guy like Jalen Carter who's set to get paid probably north of $40 million a season next offseason. And he's just one of a bunch of different young stars the Eagles have that they got to get paid. So priority number one for the Birds this offseason, again, has been just clearing up cap space. So obviously with Bryce Huff being on a massive contract and him having been extremely disappointing last season, I think clearly the best move for both sides was just for them to try and find a trade partner and move on. But I think everyone quickly realized that Huff wasn't going to be dealt before June 1st, simply because if the Eagles did make a move then, I don't believe that it was even financially possible, or at the very least, it was very financially unwise, and it would have put them in a really difficult cap situation. So everyone kind of started to suggest that after June 1st, potentially you could see a Bryce Huff trade, because that's when it would become more financially digestible for the Eagles to handle. So we waited a few months, we got to OTAs, and of course, Bryce Huff wasn't there, which, at that point, the writing was clearly on the wall that something was going on behind the scenes, and on Friday, it finally happened. As Adam Schefter reported, quote, ESPN sources, 49ers and Eagles are working to finalize a trade that will send edge rusher Bryce Huff to San Francisco for a mid-round pick. The trade cannot and would not be processed until, of course, after June 1st, but both sides are working to make it happen, and Huff already has reworked his contract to help facilitate the trade. In San Francisco, Huff will be reunited with 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh, his former head coach with the Jets. So first off, my initial reaction to that trade is, obviously it's good for the Eagles to finally get off that contract. I also think it's amazing that they were somehow able to get a mid-round pick in the deal now still at the time of this recording. We don't know what kind of pick exactly the Eagles got, but honestly, just getting anything in return, I think, is a huge win, so thumbs up for that. Also, obviously, again, the trade's not going to be processed until after June 1st, which, like I said, that was always what was going to happen. And also, I think it obviously makes a ton of sense for the 49ers, given that, like Schefter said, they got Robert Saleh as their defensive coordinator, and obviously Saleh was the head coach with the Jets when Huff had his best years there. So, I think it works out perfectly for both sides, given that Huff gets to go back to a place where he feels comfortable, at least go play under somebody that he's familiar with, playing a scheme that he's familiar with, and potentially have a bounce-back season next year. The 49ers obviously get a player who they think is really talented for pretty good value, and then the Eagles, they just get to get off that contract and move on. So again, I think it's a win-win-win trade for all three sides involved. But as I alluded to earlier in this video, I gotta say, for the Eagles, I think this move is even better than you might think, because Howie Roseman did it again. He did something pretty awesome behind the scenes that Schefter talked about a little bit in that previous tweet, given that he was able to get Huff to rework his contract to facilitate the trade. And that gave the Eagles a lot more cap relief than they were initially going to get. And Schefter actually elaborated a bit more on it later, saying, quote, before the trade can get finalized next week, the Eagles restructured Bryce Huff's contract this week. He was set to make about $17 million fully guaranteed this season from Philadelphia, but the Eagles now will take on only $9.05 million in salary, leaving the 49ers responsible for the remaining $7.95 million due to Huff this season. And then later, Field Yates also explained what exactly that does for the Eagles cap-wise now, saying, quote, the cap specifics of this deal. the Eagles declined Bryce Huff's $15.58 million fully guaranteed option bonus, which turned into base salary. Philadelphia then turned $9.05 million of that base salary into a signing bonus, which allows San Francisco to take on the remaining money, $7.95 million. That's what we already knew, but here's where it gets good. In sum, the Eagles save $7.95 million in cash and create north of $15 million in 2025 cap space. San Francisco will inherit the final 2 years of Huff's deal, owing him $7.95 million in cap and cash for this year. So again, overall, I just got to say, what a job by Howie Roseman and the Eagles to not only get off that Huff contract, but also get an additional draft pick from it, and also create even more salary cap space than I initially expected. Like, just the fact that they were able to create $15 million in cap space for this year is amazing. You know, I don't know all the specifics of how the salary cap works and what exactly the cap ramifications of this trade look like moving into the future, but I'm sure it's only positive. I'm sure it only created more space for Howie Roseman and the Eagles to go out in future off seasons and extend some of their bright young stars like a Jalen Carter, a Nolan Smith, Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, all those guys. Howie Roseman and the Eagles did it once again. What a great trade by Howie Roseman, and I couldn't be happier about this deal. And that was kind of the last big domino that still had yet to fall for the Eagles this offseason. So now that that's happened, we can really start to focus more on OTA stuff. And I got a pretty fun video planned to come out regarding that very soon that I think you guys are going to like a lot. So stay tuned for that. But again, super happy about this trade. Just wanted to come on here real quick. I didn't have a video planned for today, so this is kind of just off the cuff, maybe a lot more unorganized and probably less high quality than these videos usually are, but I hope you guys still enjoyed the video. Just kind of giving you guys my raw initial reactions to this trade and what it means. Again, definitely a big fan of it, but I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think of this Bryce Huff trade? How do you feel about the financial ramifications of all of it? You know, again, just give me all your thoughts down in the comments below, and also make sure you guys subscribe and you turn on notifications. That way, you don't miss any other future videos when they're uploaded, covering the Eagles, covering the entire offseason. Again, you're not going to want to miss any of it, so subscribe, turn on notifications, and also drop a like down below to show some support, because it really does help me out a ton. So you can get to at least 500 likes today for Bryce Huff finally being traded. And also, if you want to watch another Eagles video going over some other OTA stuff, you can check this out right here. Now, with all that being said, that's pretty much all I got for this one, guys. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.